Hello friends, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Nick, and this is MSFS Flight Plans, a place that, if we're all lucky, and if we can all behave ourselves, maybe, just maybe, will become the ultimate sightseeing destination for the sim on YouTube. I know some of you guys, particularly our Brazilian members, big shout out to you guys, were eagerly anticipating the Sao Paulo tour that I was planning, but unfortunately we're going to have to hold off just a little bit longer on that one, and I'm just as disappointed as you are, but I'll tell you the reason behind that in just a bit once we get up in the air. So I knew if I was going to have to tell you something like that, I had better come up with something pretty cool as an interim flight to try to impress you and win back your love, and that is going to be what I think is going to be an absolutely awesome flight. We're about to see one of the coolest little hidden gems in the entire sim, and that is the ruins at Tikal in Guatemala, and this is going to be a really short hop flight. We'll probably be in the air for 15-20 minutes tops, I think. And since this will be a jungle cruise, of course we have to fly the ultimate jungle cruiser, and if it looks a little bit different once we get in, and by different I mean far superior to the default version, this is the Black Square edition of the Porter. And if you have this plane, you know it's awesome. And if you don't, well, it's awesome. All right, let's get it started up real quick. I got everything else all set up. As always, if you like this flight, I'll have this exact flight plan included as a link in the video description, along with the add-ons, which I'll tell you about in just a second, so that if you want to take this flight, all you have to do is pull it into a little NavMap and then drag it over into the sim. And there's one thing you're going to want to do before you do that, and I'm going to actually do it with you guys just as a little reminder that you need to do it. You're going to have to remove any waypoints that it decides to put in here before the first user-added waypoint, and I'll show you what I mean here in just a second once we get this thing up to where I can turn the starter off. And look who's with us. It's Chet's wife, again. My favorite person in the whole world. She says she's working on her master's thesis and wanted to come out here to see the ruins because what she tells me is that she believes that there's no possible way that pre-Columbian men could have been intelligent enough to build the structures that we're going to see. So she wants to go out there and study them for a while, so once we get to the ruins, we're just going to drop her off and let her do her thing out there. Okay, so here's what you're going to have to do with this to get this to work right. If you don't do it, the plane's going to take off. Let me get a little closer so you can see what's going on here. It's going to take off, and by the time we get to the end of the runway, we'll be about right here. And it's going to try to circle back around and start over here again. So we're going to remove all of the waypoints that this thing added on its own before we get to the first user waypoint, which is this one here. So let's just clear those out. Yep, clear, clear, and we should be good to go now. Yep, so that'll take us right to our first significant turning spot. Okay, alright, so how's everything looking here? We got that set, GPS, give it 1 notch of flaps, and you're supposed to lock the tail wheel when you're taking off. I found I've had no issues taking off without it locked, and when we come in for landing, it does create some issues on landing, at least for me, if we leave it locked, so I'm just going to leave it unlocked. Okay, let's do this. Go ahead and give it full RPMs, and parking brake off. So this airport is Mundo Maya International, and there is a freeware add-on for this, which I have included in the video description, along with the add-on for the ruins, which you will definitely want to make sure that even if you don't do this airport, you add the one for the ruins, or you're probably going to be disappointed when you get out there. And I've got some breaking news. I finally got Rex AccuSeason to work, but it was bittersweet because you're supposed to get a free upgrade to the Advanced Edition. I think that's what it's called, if you have the Standard Edition. But unfortunately, I bought mine through Orbix, and if you buy it through Orbix, they don't give you a product code or an order number, and you need to have both of those things to upgrade. So I just went ahead and totally uninstalled it and bought the upgrade, as much as I hated to do it, from Sim Market, which gave me both of those things, and now we've got it. But it's something that I use on virtually every flight if I can, when I could do it. So I figured I'd probably get my money's worth back out of it, but maybe they'll have a little bit more foresight next time they try to do that, so you can actually get the upgrade if that's what you're supposed to do. But enough of that. Okay, alright, give it full condition, full RPMs, and we got our 1 notch of flaps in, and away we'll go. You ready? About to have a good time? Heck yeah, we are. Yes, we are. So the way I found out about this, I was listening to a podcast, because I'm a total nerd about ancient structures, and the host just happened to mention this place out in Guatemala, which apparently is a pretty big deal. I'd never... Good grief. Oh, that's how you know it's time to rotate, huh? And he said, oh yeah, he was talking to his co-host, said, you got to check out Tikal in Guatemala. So I checked it out. The satellite map, sure enough, it didn't look all that different from some of the other big Mayan ruin sites out here. But there was an add-on for it. And as you're going to see, it is a superb add-on. Alright, so let's go ahead and get the autopilot on. And a great flight level for this is 2,500 feet. Too much lower than that, you'll be a little too close to the trees. Too much higher, you really won't get the best detailing of the ruins. So that's what my recommendation is. If you want to come back to a long runway, the one we just left from is 10,000 feet. And it's the only long runway anywhere around here. From the ruins, about 30 to 50 miles in all directions. There's some more runways, but they're all either not paved or very short. 4,000 feet or less. So since I didn't want to fly all the way back here, I found a little dirt spot out in the jungle, which is where we're going to attempt to put this thing down. It is not a designated runway, but after that last flight out to the canyons, this should be a walk in the park. But when you see it, it's got about a 30-degree angle of bank on it. So it won't be easy by any means, but we're all seasoned pros now after that last ordeal we put ourselves through. So this town we're going to see down our left is called Flores, population 22,000. And when you look at it on the satellite map at the end, which we will do, you'll see it's situated almost in the dead center of the Yucatan. And there isn't much else around here, at least not anything of comparable size, until you get down to the coast in Belize, about 100 miles to the east, which makes what I'm about to tell you all the more fascinating. This little tiny place is considered the second longest continually inhabited, man, I'm really struggling with that word lately, in all the Americas, after Cholula, Mexico. And I never heard of that place either, but apparently they've got a giant pyramid up there too, which I did check out, so you better believe we'll fly over that at some point. Hopefully someone did an add-on so it doesn't look like a big Amazon fulfillment center. Before the Spanish arrived out here in 1541, a subset of the Mayans known as the Itza moved down here from the northern Yucatan and set up shop on that little island right up there, which used to be an island. Now they've got it connected by a little causeway on this lake called Pitan Itza. And they made this little island the capital of their territory and called it Nojpeten, which means Great Island. And you would think if it was their capital, there'd be all kinds of ancient things to see down there. Unfortunately, it looks like they tore it all down. And not only was this place the capital of a Mayan kingdom, but this was the very last stronghold of the Mayans as they resisted the Spanish takeover. And the Spanish weren't able to finally bring it down until 1697, which stunned me. That seems incredibly recent. Alright, so let's hang out here. We're probably a little bit high. I'm actually going to come down just a little. I want to get back to 2,500. And the handful of survivors the Spanish couldn't kill or capture escaped to the surrounding jungles, and from what I could gather, no one is really sure what happened to them. But we could probably wager a guess, and it probably wasn't good. That little town just off to the right off our nose there is called San Andres, and it's just a baby compared to Flores, both in size and age. It wasn't incorporated until 1962. Maybe some of the Mayans wound up there. We can only hope. Highly doubtful. But look at the scenery down here. Just looks great. Man, we have been just hitting home run after home run in Central and South America. Unfortunately, as you're about to hear, that was not the case in Sao Paulo, but we're going to try to find a workaround for that. Not going to leave our Brazilian brothers hanging. So there's San Andres. And this is all, what hasn't been cleared for farming is all rainforest out here. Alright, we're going to hang out at this altitude. I think that'll be alright. So again, this big lake is Lake Pitan Itza, the third largest in all of Guatemala, with a surface area of around 38 square miles, which isn't huge, but apparently for Guatemala it's pretty big. And it's pretty deep for its size, going all the way down to about 520 feet in some spots, which is more than twice the depth of at least one of the Great Lakes. Lake Erie, if you're curious. And now that I've opened that can of worms, Lake Superior is the deepest, at 1,300 feet at the deepest spot. I know you were wondering that. And I've read that there are 27 Mayan archaeological sites around the shorelines here, and I looked for any of them and couldn't find them. There were a couple of place markers in Google that looked, of course it was all in Spanish, that looked kind of like they may have been archaeological sites. There was one out here that was under one of the museum markers, but all this stuff is just really covered by trees, so if there was anything to see, it was obscured by trees, unfortunately. I tried to put the live weather back on. When I took my test flight last night, it looked just like this with the live weather. The wind was good, but it was really, really foggy for the current live weather, so I set it back to as best as I could, make it look like it did last night. Oh, we're only at 1,600 feet. We only get to 2,600, so let's keep on climbing. So we've got about 20 miles of jungle to traverse before we get to the ruins. So I'll tell you about Tikal before we get there. This lake looks beautiful, doesn't it? And that is pretty deep for a lake this small. 520 feet. I mean, that's not gigantic. Let me tell you about Sao Paulo, actually, before I get to Tikal again. So as I mentioned before, I'd flown in there, let's see, with my King Air once, did a lot of big jet flights out there when I was in career mode. And I knew it was massive. I knew there were tons and tons of buildings down there because, you know, you can see them when you're flying into their main airport. But I'd never taken a real close look at anything on the ground. So initially I went out there, took my initial test flight and everything because, you know, everybody's griping about them not doing any decent world updates in that part of the world. It was all autogen buildings. And I'd bookmarked a couple of sites that I found on the Google Maps that I wanted to see, some stadiums, some parks. And all but one of the stadiums was flat. So I was like, well, surely there's probably some add-ons for it. So I went and looked in flightsim.to, and there are 7 add-ons for it for the whole city. And it was all photogrammetry, and the guy that, you know, the developer, but they were all like 3 years old, so I thought, uh-oh, that's a warning sign. So I put them all in. It was like 20 gigabytes. So just a massive set of files to get it all in there. Took another test flight. You could see some of the structures I was looking for better, but my frame rate dropped into the teens. So then I started going through my roster of the low performance drag planes, getting all the way down to my Optica, which is like, if nothing else, throw the Optica in there. And even then it was getting up into the 30s occasionally, but it was still so much stuttering and freezing that it would have been a really, really bad flight. So I was left with the decision of either doing a flight with the default stuff, which does not look good, or not doing it at all. And then just today, shout out to member Dan Buck, who is from Sao Paulo, and he gave me a list of about 15 points of interest with some details about them that I need to check out. So Dan, you saved that flight. You single-handedly saved it because I was going to ditch it. But because you sent that and put the effort into it, we're going to do it. There were, fortunately, a couple of individual add-ons for some bridges that look really cool. There's a big Grand Prix track that looks cool, some parks. But it's definitely not going to be the best for graphics, but if for nothing else, just seeing how massive that city is quite a sight to behold. So the flight was like 40 minutes, and we never even left the boundaries of the city. I mean, it is huge, and you guys know you've probably flown into it. And it's old. About as old as this area. But unfortunately, it's so built up, and most of that building up happened during the 20th century, that anything that is historically significant is kind of obscured. And it doesn't look like it does in real life because I had to pull out the photogrammetry stuff, but we're going to do it anyway. Just as a shout out to all our Brazilian bros. We'll do it. But I'm going to need a little more time because I got to see what looks good, what the best angle is to try to spot stuff, and then draw it all out in the most efficient way possible. So, now that we got that out of the way, let's move to the total opposite end of the graphical quality spectrum. And I'll tell you about what we're going to see here in Tikal. Look at those fields. That AccuSim did make a difference. Even though it probably looks like this most of the time, I really feel like it made a difference. At least in this part of the world. I don't think they have like fall foliage out here. So originally, Tikal was called Yaxmatl, and it was one of the biggest Mayan cities to be fully mapped out by archaeologists up to this point. And it too was a capital, but long before what we saw back there in Flores. In fact, it was abandoned in the 10th century, which is about 300 years before they really started building things up back down on that little island. But this place was huge by ancient standards, spanning about 6 square miles just in the city, the central city area. And they had big ramparts all around it. And it contained roughly 3,000 structures, they think. They found 3,000 so far, and I don't know if that was just rummaging around down in the jungle or if they did some LiDAR. I know they've been doing a lot of that lately, aerial LiDAR surveys. But 3,000 structures. That is a lot. Most of which, unfortunately, is still buried in the trees, but we'll be able to see all the big stuff up here. And the area where the ruins are now, as you're going to see, is elevated a bit from the surrounding terrain, which was and still is very swampy. So the Mayans built miles and miles of elevated causeways going out in all directions, and you can still see the evidence of one of them. I think that's what it is. We'll look at it on the satellite map at the end because you can't really see it in the sim. But there's like a long depression running to the north from the temple area. So we'll check that out at the end. And maybe I should bring my flaps up. That's what happened, guys. You get so excited about a place, it didn't seem to have bothered anything. And even though they get a fair amount of rain out here, it was somewhat unpredictable, apparently. And since this was not a migratory society, they all stayed in one spot. It was very agricultural, so a drought would be lethal to the population if it happened. So they built 10 giant reservoirs that they found so far, one of which has been refurbished to support the little research village they've got down there now. And archaeologists think that the first folks moved out here around 1000 BC, but perhaps, the nomadic people were a little bit before that. And they started building the first of the really big structures around 300 BC, which is around the same time where they were building up some of the same types of stuff in the other Mayan cities that were out here. And they were all across the Yucatan back in the day. And at its peak in Tikal, the population may have swelled to over 90,000 just in the area around the temples that we're going to see, with some scientists speculating that maybe as many as 400,000 could have been living within a radius of about 7 miles from the core complex up here. Which sounds like a lot until you consider that Sao Paulo currently has 10 times the population density in their downtown area. Then again, they didn't have many 30-story apartment complexes out here, because they weren't smart enough to build anything like that, right? Tikal's golden era lasted between 200 and 900 AD. And thankfully we know a lot about it because scholars have been able to decipher all their hieroglyphic engravings. And it's like, if you see the temple complexes out in Egypt, it's kind of the same thing. The hieroglyphs look different, but they were all over everything. And during the time when this place was rocking and rolling, much like the world today, the land was rife with war and politics, as everyone was trying to conquer everyone else, including some of the folks from Teotihuacan up by Mexico City, if you saw that flight, who were not the least bit happy about all the tourism dollars coming down here once these guys started building their own pyramids. And apparently they had good relations for a while. They said there was even an embassy down here where someone from Teotihuacan came down here, I guess, to dispense goodwill. But as Tikal entered its final 100 years, the primary issue wasn't invasion, and they certainly had plenty of that leading up to it, but self-destruction, as the population exploded after the collapse of some of the neighboring cities around here. And I think most of those also self-destructed. The population just got too big for the land to maintain it. So they clear-cut most of the remaining trees, farmed the last bits of nutrients out of the land, and the perpetual plague of too much population, too small of an area, contaminated water, until the city could no longer support itself and turn into San Francisco. I read they had, at the end days, the apocalyptic days, they had nothing but squatters and folks with no other place to go left behind, and they were just tearing up all the burial complexes and looting everything. And I think a good chunk of the population wound up down there around Lake Piednitsa, that first spot that we saw. And by 950 AD, this place was totally deserted. And just think about that for a minute. This giant city out here, home to maybe as many as 400,000 people, just completely abandoned and eventually swallowed up by the rainforest. And here's some of the temples right here. So we're going to come out this way a little bit and see some of the modern stuff they built up out here. They got some hotels and stuff, none of the places you'd like. I think the highest rated one got like a 3.1 star, but I'm guessing it's mostly researchers out here, but you know those guys love to party. And then up here there's a little road that goes to where all the temples are. And this wasn't just pyramids. I mean, there were houses and farms and roads all over the place, and now it's just thousands of square miles of jungle. So we'll get a nice look at it. And I was reading that in the 1950s, before there was a little road, can we see the little road? There it is right there. This little road comes all the way back from the lake that we flew over, winds all the way through the forest, and that's how you get out here today. But they said when they first started cutting the trees down around this and taking a good look at it, they built a little landing strip out here, which does not appear to exist anywhere near here today. I looked for it. There's not one in the sim. There doesn't appear to be one. Even from the air, I couldn't spot. So at the end, when we look at the satellite map, this area running right out here, there's a big depression in the trees, and there's not a modern road going through it. So I'm guessing that was probably where one of their main highways was coming into this. And north of here, about maybe 50 to 80 miles, there was another huge mine complex. No add-ons available for it. Did check that out. They do have some big pyramids, but without any add-ons, it just looks like Well, not much. It was mostly tree covered. They didn't have it cleared out as much as this one either. And I also tried to spot the reservoir that they're using for the water out here now, but I couldn't really see anything that looked like that. And all this is pretty accurate. These are probably autogen buildings, but there is a spot that's got a footprint. Maybe that's the reservoir. Definitely looks like a watering hole, doesn't it? But unless this is a big tourist destination, that seems like a lot of structures just for research out here, but this is a pretty big complex. Can you see the depression in the trees out here? I don't really think so. And our strip, or whatever the thing is that we're going to land at, is going to be out here a little ways. Once we circle around it, we'll head out in that direction. So these guys did have lots and lots of issues with invasions from other Mayans, and I didn't realize there were so many little subsects of Mayans, and they had eventually, after the turn of the millennium, developed kind of a dynastic rule out here, where it's kind of a lineage-based thing. And then one of them didn't wind up having any sons, and a woman took over, and that's when they built all the big stuff, right? Yeah. And then the people from Teotihuacan came down and said, all right, you guys are done. And they ruled it for a while, and then the place just got too built up and it imploded. If you fly a little bit lower, you can see the details even better, but I felt like if we got down to around 2,000, which is where I was when I took the last flight, it was uncomfortably close to the trees. And I also took the fuel tanks off the wings because they'd stick way out here. So just a heads up, if you're going to fly this plane, pull out your little iPad and take the fuel tanks off the wings, or it's going to obscure a lot of that. But look at that. How cool is that? There are some other sites that I went and checked out up in Mexico that are kind of like this with pyramids and stuff, but those didn't look great. A couple of them, they just put some default buildings in where there should have been pyramids. But I'm going to keep looking around. If there's any other spots that are like this, and if you know of any that also have add-ons that modify them, let me know. Because this kind of stuff is just endlessly fascinating to me. Look, even right down there in the trees, there's some stuff. That little spot there. But as far as things like this go in the sim, that looks good. Real good. And just imagine the first people, after this had been abandoned for 1,000 years, to come across something like that. And there were places like this all over out here. Just finding that in the woods. And I've been reading lately that they have found some pretty significant structures up in, or down, I guess, from here in Brazil, out in the rainforest, the Amazon rainforest. Like really big, with lots of roads and stuff. But with all that, they're running into the issue of the forest disappearing fast enough as it is, so they're probably not real keen on stripping some more stuff out just to make way for archaeologists. But some speculate there may have been a huge and quite advanced civilization out there. Be interesting to see how that unfolds. Alright, so our landing area is at 800 feet, so I'm going to come back down to 1,800 feet, start slowing down. We'll be there pretty soon. We'll just keep an eye on that till we get there. And there we go. So I've been trying to ponder the best way to take the pulse of what you guys want to see for future flights, because I'm down with anything. And each week I get all kinds of recommendations for locations all over the world. And this week, one of our members suggested that maybe I should slap a survey up on our community page with a few potential spots, you know, in a specific region, but, you know, different spots in that region. So I thought maybe I'd do that for Australia, because I have several city packs out there. We've only hit one, Brisbane. And I think I've got 4 or 5 more. So maybe I'll do that, but I'm thinking maybe it'd be better to wait a little bit longer, because the last survey I put up there about a month ago, we only had about 20 respondents, so I just don't know if we have enough members at this point to get a candid bit of feedback. But I mean, I guess if everybody saw it voted, that would at least help. And again, I'll do anything, so I don't care. And just because we don't wind up flying at a place that maybe one of you guys recommended, please don't think that I've blown it off. I check out every single spot when I get a recommendation, so keep them coming. But just to triage things a little bit on the front end, if you're wondering what would make a good flight, here are the main factors that I think make for a good flight. If these 3 components are all present, you can be pretty sure it's going to be good. The first, of course, is it needs to look good. There's no shortage of interesting places in the world, but if they look good in the sim, that is a big bonus. Like I mentioned Monument Valley a few weeks ago. I went and checked that out. Very cool spot with a few add-on landmarks that looked fantastic. The add-ons did, but everything else out there was so awful that I didn't think it was worthy for being a recommended flight on the channel. Same with Malta. One of the most interesting places on Earth, but that was a total disaster in the sim. Number 2, it makes it more interesting if there are at least a handful of things to see in a fairly tight region. Otherwise, I have to deal with the challenge of filling the dead air, which is not an insurmountable hurdle, as I do enjoy talking to myself. But it's a little bit easier when I feel like there's more to describe than we have time for, instead of trying to dig up the minutia just to fill the space. And finally, and perhaps of most importance, I like finding out about spots like this one that we just saw. Places that not many people have probably checked out before. Unless the well really runs dry, we're not going to do places like the Grand Canyon, Giza, New York City. I'm sure most of you guys have probably flown over those places enough to not care to see them again. Although I guess I could always do a deep dive for all of us hardcore nerds. That last one down to Orlando was a rare exception to that qualifier, and I only did that because several people wanted to see it, and I'm so intimately familiar with it. So again, don't worry about not making the cut. I bet every one of you has spots that would at least be worth looking into. It may even be one that you know so well that it just bores you to tears because maybe you live by it, maybe it's your home base that you like to fly around, all the while the rest of us have never even heard of it. So let's just throw it all against our fuselage and see what sticks. And by the way, if you saw that last survey, I asked how many of our members were real-world pilots. And I think we had 23 total responses. And again, that was about a month ago, so if I did it again, we'd probably have more now. But 4% are commercial pilots, 30% are GA certified, 13% want to get licensed, which is the category I put myself in, and 52% prefer to just wear aviator glasses. In every single flight, and I mean every one of them, I wonder how many real pilots are cringing as I violate procedure after procedure between operating the aircraft, flight procedures, and just so you know, if you want to know, I'm also a total geek for procedure when I'm not doing these types of flights, or at least as far as I know the actual procedure. But there's plenty of channels out there that are dedicated to doing everything by the book, and I love all those guys and all their channels too. That's how I learned most of the procedures. But it just doesn't jibe well with what I'm trying to accomplish here, which is simply to show you some really cool spots, tell you all about them, just to give you as many places to visit as we can come up with. But if I was doing everything the way I wanted to do it, you probably wouldn't be watching right now. Alright, so there's our spot. Let's go ahead and cut the engines, get our flaps going. You can see there's a little road over there too, and you can already tell the bank that this thing's got. And this is going to be a little bit like, though not as steep as that first little fire lookout that we came into for that Canyonlands tour. So at least we'll have a little bit of uphill grade to help us slow down, and I'm probably still going to throw it in reverse too once we get down on the ground. And you got to kind of come in at a diagonal to get across that wider spot because you got to clear some trees there. That road may be too skinny if you try to get down there. It looks like there's some trees that are a little bit close. I'll take my chances over here. I think 60 knots is going to be our stall speed, so I'm going to see how close we can get to that. And not hit any of these trees. Oh, it's close, isn't it? Alright, well, we did it. Unbelievable. Okay, so let's get the parking brake on, get our flaps up. Did you enjoy that? That's the expression I love. I love you, Karen. Tell Chet I said that in a purely platonic way, of course. Poor Chet. Can't wait to have him back in the flight. Alright, let's turn this little gate off so we can shut that down. Oh, there we go. And why not open the door? It's nice out here. Just crack it. Doesn't want to open all the way. How about we do this? That'll take care of it. Alright, here comes a little NavMap. Let's see what we got going on out here. Alright, so again, unless you want to come back to this airport, I drew this to get you to that place that we just landed at. So once you see this little thing and all of a sudden shoot off this way, That is, and I would have just drawn it to one of these airports, but sometimes when you cross over the flight plan, it jacks up the GPS and it doesn't know what to do at the crossover point. So, although we did do okay here. So put it to wherever you want, but that's what's going on here. If you try to take it all the way, it's going to fly you all the way out here. And all these are about 30 miles away. And as you can see, that one's 2,000 feet, 2,000. That one's a little bit longer, but I think it's dirt. Yeah, that one's dirt. That one's paved, but it's really short. And that one's grass. So I'll let you decide what you want to do with that. So here's where we took off. And as you can see, I mean, there's not, if you just look for the gray spots where there might be population, not a lot of stuff out here to get down by the coast. And I think this is in Belize over here. That's probably, yeah, Belize City. That's got to be Belize. So that's probably the next big area. Is that a city? No, that's just a big pasture. So there's not a lot out here. And you can see all this rainforest and stuff out here. Very remote. But there are, if you look on the Google map for other big Mayan archaeological sites, there was one up here somewhere. There's one out here. And these were all pretty big too, but they're all just really jungle covered right now. All right, so here's where we took off from. There's where that island was that became their capital. And again, this causeway wasn't here originally. And I mean, that's just not that big. So I'm wondering if they may have built some stuff up on the land too, because if that was the capital, it wasn't the capital of the entire Mayan Empire, but for that little subsect that kind of sprang off, this is where they moved to. And there's our big lake, Pitanitsa. There's San Andreas. And then we cruised on out here and checked out our sites. So if you can see this depression in the woods here? You can see it going out there. It looks like they got a road, but it kind of just dead ends there. So I'm wondering if this is where one of their main highways was coming out here, because this is about the direction that would have headed towards the next big Mayan area. And that kind of looks like it may have been a little, I don't know. It'd be cool to see like a LiDAR map of this, because then you'd see everything that's down under the trees, which would be pretty neat. But let's see if we can find their, those kind of look like reservoirs, don't they? And I don't know where the other 9 were, but that's probably what they're using for that, because I don't see anything else like that. That's certainly not it. That's a swimming pool. And then we get out to the ruins. You can see they got some here. Looks like a little pyramid sticking up there. It's a little bit blurry. And then here's where all the big stuff was. And man, it looked just like that. Even the little white part of this one here, all of it looked really fantastic. And if you try to find this in the sim, the spot where we landed, you won't see anything. You might see that little road in the sim because we could spot that, but in little NavMap, you won't see that clearing. Only in the sim could I find that. I had to do a little flying around here. And all these things that look like they're open, I think they're clouds. They are. So if you want to land at that spot, just follow this flight plan. That'll get you out there. And that's it. That's our trip out to Tikal. Very cool site. Very interesting. As always, had an absolute blast. Can't wait to see y'all again in the skies. Later.